Whether you are located in Georgetown or northern Iraq, tonight we're talking about how you too can write like the Exorcist. The reason I'm talking tonight about how William Peter Blatty penned the first draft of his novel, The Exorcist, is because anyone who is a writer can benefit from knowing how quickly he crafted it. And I'm not just talking to creative writers tonight. You could be a copywriter. You could be writing your YouTube script. If anything, this video is going to be more important to the person who needs to break through the resistance and write something like a YouTube script or an about page or a VSL tonight, as opposed to someone who is thinking about writing their novel. You see, William Peter Blatty wrote the book The Exorcist in 1971. And I saw the movie when I was about 16, watched it alone. It was the year 2000, perhaps. It was whenever the version you've never seen came out. Now everybody knows it as the extended director's cut, which is a slightly different version. But in the year 2000, The Exorcist was put back on the big screen, and I watched it on pay-per-view in a hotel in Montreal. And it was the version you've never seen, which was, William Friedkin's first attempt at a director's cut. And while there are some slight differences to the film, that's the first one I ever saw. And I imagine it's more likely that you've seen a later director's cut than the original version. I love the version you've never seen. I think it's better than the extended director's cut. But yeah, if I was seeing it for the first time or showing it to somebody like I often do, yeah, I would show you the original version. Um, but seeing that the version you've never seen really impacted me. I was at the perfect age to see it. I was old enough to be able to watch it intellectually, but I was still young to be freaked out about. And the last time I showed someone The Exorcist, it was wonderful. It was just, that moment when she's sitting on the bed and it's like been the most disturbing we've seen in the movie so far, and her head turns around. It's not the head spinning scene, but her head does a 180 and looks at her mom. And I just remember my girlfriend like sliding into me, just like, ah, and that was just the most amazing feeling. Like that's why we show people scary movies that we loved young. So anyway, obviously the movie had a big impression on me, and it's hard to believe that 8 years ago, this coming January, William Peter Blatty, the author, would have passed away. And the other reason this is a very special subject to me is because January 12th, 2017, William Peter Blatty passed away. I got on Amazon and bought a used copy of the book, and I read it. And a year later, I would have changed my whole life. I went back to school to wrap up my undergrad in the end of 2017, and exactly a year later, January 2018, I'm going into a creative writing MFA program, and it was hugely inspired by William Peter Blatty and this book. So I want to talk to you tonight about how he was able to write the book so quickly, and how it became such a huge success, because we all want to break through the resistance and get our work done. So let's just start with the beginning, okay? So he writes this book, and he has no money by the time he's done writing the book. William Peter Blatty, like myself at the time, he had separated from his wife, and he's writing alone, and he's basically writing down this book that he had planned for almost 2 decades. And once he's done with that first draft, it's like he has no more time. He's got to move on to the next project, and he submits the book. Um, he collects his fee from Harper and Row, the publishers, and he starts on his new project because there's no time or money to keep messing with the book. So this book literally is his first draft. And in essence, it's the first draft. You know, his publisher, you know, would have made little edits or whatever, but when you read this, it has an urgency to it. It's because it's a freaking first draft. Um, in 1968, so let's go back a couple years, he was an author between jobs, alone with his research, writing for the better part of a year. And The Exorcist was eventually published and adapted for the screen in 1973. It's known as a movie that took the world by storm in 74, but that's because it came out, what, Christmas Day, 1973? So it comes out right at the end of 73. And I would argue that its status and influence throughout pop culture surpasses even Star Wars. So think about the statement I just made. In its influence and versatility, the Exorcist novel and movie have been more influential on pop culture than Star Wars. Just because Star Wars has more sequels and it's more popular and it's made more money, that doesn't mean it's more influential. This book changed the landscape of the horror paperbacks. It like basically started the horror paperback boom of the 70s and 80s, which is where all the Stephen King stuff comes from. And that whole era ends when Thomas Harris comes out with The Silence of the Lambs, and then horror fiction kind of disappears, and it's more about thrillers and even like cozy mysteries. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that The Exorcist itself has influenced not just media, but religion itself. Just like Milton's Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno have shaped the way people see hell, and the icons of the Bible, like the apple, is from Milton's Paradise Lost. That's not from the Book of Genesis. I would argue that this book and how it discusses demons and exorcism. Even Protestants, like their worldview of Christianity is coming from this book, not actually the scriptures. So that's why I'd say like it's even more influential than a movie like Star Wars that would come out about, you know, 4 or 5 years later. And the novel I'm arguing tonight, it exists in its power because of the way Blatty was able to produce his first draft. So incidentally, it was 2010 before Blatty was revising and supplementing a 40th anniversary edition, because just like William Friedkin with the movie, Blatty has to come in and like mess with his book. He added like a chapter or something later on. But I mean, he did it because he wrote the book in one draft. He never had time to tinker with it. So he wanted to tinker with it. And it's important to understand when we use the term first draft, we mean the first draft submitted for review. So the writer should submit a completed draft, one that has exhausted his ability to remain objective and find mistakes. That's why in workshop, it's wasteful to submit unfinished work. So if you're a creative writer, if you're doing workshopping with other creative writers, don't waste the time. Just be honest. Be like, I don't have anything written. Don't like give someone a partial work for them to review. That's a waste of everyone's time. So before William Peter Blatty was the Academy Award-winning writer of the Exorcist book, he authored a few other short novels. Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane in 1960 is an existential comedy about faith. And that gives us an idea of who Blatty is. So he was a gifted humorist, even back to his Georgetown days. And Georgetown is the Jesuit university near Washington, D.C. But he was also like really informed by theology. So he's like this Lithuanian American Catholic who got a Jesuit education. Like the Jesuits paid for it. So like he's, you know, just proud Catholic guy, really, really indebted to Georgetown and the Jesuits for giving him that as education. So while his novels and his humor was well received, it was $10,000 that he won as a contestant on Groucho Marx's You Bet Your Life in 1961 that gave him the financial freedom to write full time. So good for him, man. 10 grand falls in your lap in 1961. It's like I'm not gonna mess around. I'm gonna write and do the thing. So but get this, okay? This is the interesting thing. So before he had even won that 10 grand, he already had a variety of jobs, most notably as the top dog for the Navy's Psychological Warfare Division. Yeah. And this isn't some conspiracy theory thing like, oh, you know, people were throwing up when the movie The Exorcist came out, because it was really the government testing out subsonic weapons. And that's why, yeah, in 74, like people had these insane reactions that they never had again when the movie was released, re-released rather. Or when it came on home video, you didn't hear about people passing on, throwing up then. It only happened. Anyway, we're not talking about the conspiracy theories. We're talking about what's actually right here in the book. It's like they want you to know this stuff about the author. Can you see that? He served as an editor with the U.S. Information Agency in Lebanon and was policy branch chief of the U.S. Air Force Psychological Warfare Division. What were they doing? It's weird. Right there in the book. So he paid the bills after he gets this 10 grand by penning screenplays, most famously for Blake Edwards' historical Panther sequel, A Shot in the Dark. If you hadn't seen it, I remember it being funny. I saw him when I was a little kid. And yeah. He also wrote Blake Edwards' What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? Blake Edwards, not as famous as he once was. I don't ever see the stuff pop up on streaming. So if it's not on streaming, you're probably it's gonna fade into obscurity. But the point is, these were comedies, smart comedies, but he's writing funny stuff. It's like if Stephen King had this whole earlier career of just writing like smart comedies. And as it happens, he was separated. He became separated from his wife, by the late 60s. It just seems like what everybody was doing. The pill had been invented, so divorce rate is going to skyrocket because now people can have intimacy with people without any repercussions. And divorce is just around the corner anyway. At least in Europe. I guess divorce was already a thing in America, but you got to remember, like, the birth control and divorce, relatively new things. So, and I think that's why the art of the 70s was so explosive and intense, because of those very two things. The people having access to birth control and the freedom to divorce. That's why you had so much psychosexual stuff in the cinema. The birth of the slasher film. I love talking about this stuff, but I'll stay on topic. But you get the idea, like the climate. He's at the top of the world, Academy Award-winning screenwriter, and he's getting separated from his wife, and he has a couple kids. So, I've heard him talk about in interviews where when he was writing, his kids knew where they could find him, but he was doing the thing. He was like, I'm writing. And if you know who Angela Lansbury is, Murder, She Wrote. She's also like the little hottie maid in one of the versions of Gaslight. He's renting her guest house, and that's where he writes The Exorcist. At least that's where he begins to write The Exorcist. And by the end of this 9 months, when he's writing his first draft, he wraps up the book, he collects his fee, and he moves on. Like he literally like hands in the manuscript to Harper and Row, and then Paul Newman hires him to write a movie that never got filmed. But he just moved on, got to make that money. So by 71, The Exorcist is published, and all of a sudden, nearly overnight, Blatty goes from this writer of smart comedies to the forerunner of occult thrillers. And the movie rights get purchased by Warner Brothers, and on the condition that Blatty's going to produce the film and he's going to adapt the screenplay for the film. And guess what? Because if a movie wins Best Picture, the producer gets that award, not the director. He wins the Golden Globe for Best Picture as producer, and he also wins the Golden Globe. Or no, he wins the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. So he's winning an Academy Award. He's winning a Golden Globe for the movie that is made a couple years later. So the success of all this over the next couple years just turns Blatty into a different dude. You can tell, like, on the back of this book, he's like, yes, I've written like this theological work of a work of horror fiction, but a work that proves the existence of the devil, therefore proves the existence of Christ. And then by the time he comes out with Legion, he's like, I'm not evil. Don't be afraid. So Yeah, so now he has like total freedom to do whatever the hell he wants to do. So he reworks Killer Kane, that shorter novel he wrote in 60, as the ninth configuration. And he also goes on to adapt for the screen and direct the film version of the ninth configuration, which if you haven't seen, it's not a horror film, although it does. I'm not going to say it necessarily has horror elements, but it's definitely a cult film. And it's got the comedy, it's got the existential, theological stuff going on. It's also the movie that brought us the Wilhelm scream. The no, that's not the Wilhelm scream. The Wilhelm scream is the this is the movie that gives us the it's like a really weird. It's weird. It shows up in some other stuff, but it's even weirder. Like at least the Wilhelm scream can show up in like comedies and like Steven Spielberg action scenes, but there's a scene where there's a bar fight at the end and this guy like goes through a window. You'll know when you hear it. But yeah, he directs that, and then the book Legion, which is his follow-up to The Exorcist, Lieutenant Kinderman, the detective from The Exorcist, is the main character in this one. And it's so cool because you have like an elderly man, an elderly detective. It's kind of cozy, very creepy. This gets made into Exorcist 3 in 1990, which a lot of people say is even scarier than the original Exorcist. And not to get off topic, but I'll just put in my 2 cents. I do like The Exorcist 3. It is a scary movie. But because of the internet and the way that people abuse the word obscure or underrated, I am dreading that The Exorcist 3 is starting to kind of become like Halloween 3, where people act like it's such a great movie and it got done dirty. Like, yes, Halloween 3 and Exorcist 3 are both overshadowed by the original film. But I'd hate for you to go into Exorcist 3 expecting something better than the original Exorcist. It's got some great stuff in it, and it really has a wonderful, creepy atmosphere the whole way through. I'd say the first act is solid, second act is okay, third act is okay. But it's got a fucking killer 20, 30 first minutes. And it's just awesome. Like how many movies do you get with an elderly protagonist? And George C. Scott, like I watched the movie, I think of my grandpa, I was 7 years old when he passed away. So it's like to me, I'm like that's this movie is starring an old man. Um, so what does all this have to do with you and how you can write your first draft like William Peter Blatty? Well, let's see. Groucho Marx is not going to give you 10 grand so you can quit your job and write. And honestly, let's face it, if you did get 10 grand, would you really do that? Or would you be like getting high and watching YouTube all day? What would you do? What would you be buying with all that money? And yeah, so you're probably not going to get a free ride to Georgetown University. I don't even think William Peter Blatty would want you to get a full ride to Georgetown University at this point. So we'll focus on the things that you can control and do yourself. So the big one, this is how this MF was able to do what he did. Research, okay? So if you're writing a novel, like research it as if it's nonfiction, or if you're writing your YouTube script, research it. Like literally go in there. Prep is more important than the execution. So when you like if we're speaking the language of movies, if you put all your time into pre-production and planning and rehearsal, then when you show up to shoot, there's no dicking around. You know exactly what there is to do. For Blatty, he was really hell-bent on writing a book so scary that it would prove to you, the reader, that the devil was real. And you'll hear agnostics talk about it. They don't believe in the devil, but that movie does convince them that the Catholic Church is the only answer to the devil. And that's the great propaganda that The Exorcist is. It's the greatest Catholic novel of all time. He is like the Dostoevsky for Vatican II Roman Catholics. So he took it really seriously. And so when he sat down to write it, he didn't have to stop what he was doing and like Google stuff. It was just flow state, baby. So he also treated like a job. And whether he was working on screenplays for Hollywood or indulging in a passion project like this, he showed up every day and put in the work. As he said in an interview, yeah, I was separated from my wife. It was a divorce. It's bad. I had kids. I was off writing 12 hours a day, but my kids knew where they could find me if they needed me. He was just like, this is what dad's doing. Um, and it's tough, man. Like as an artist, like how many times have we heard that story? Like the artist who can't keep the home life together. And I'm giving him and his wife some slack because I'm like, yeah, y'all were like the first wave of how the pill and free love just decimated everything. But that's that stuff and those desires have always been there. So we can't blame the technology, just like social media now allegedly has destroyed dating. Those desires have always been there. It's just people are enabled, so they're going to do it. So if anything, we should be happy that the technology shows people's true colors. But the point is like distraction free. I mean, stuff like that is going to distract you, and he just hunkered down. And he incorporated his experiences into the novel. So we've established that Blatty ran a small little cottage to write in, but it was loud, um, too close to Hollywood and all that. So after a few false starts, he had to find a new place, a quieter place. And once he moved from this Angela Lansbury's like beach house and away from all these seagulls and in this like quieter cabin in the Hollywood Hills, um, he realized why he was stuck. And he claims he's like stuck on the very first sentence. I think he starts the book with the mom hearing the rats in the attic and is like, trying to write the perfect creepy opening line. But he realizes like, oh, I'm starting in the wrong place. So specifically for content that suggests the occult, you've got to open um with something supernatural. Um, I mean, yes, like Sinister is a good example of a movie where if you go in cold, you just think you're watching like a true crime movie. And then right at the midway point, you see like Mr. Boogie, like in the picture move. And it's a cool little twist, but also like it might take you out of the movie and then the movie's ruined. I would argue like Hellraiser is a good example. You don't see the Cenobites and that the narrative of that film, they really don't show up until about halfway through. Um, but Clive Barker's smart. You see them at the very beginning. It would just be too jarring if you didn't. So, Blatty knew that he had to acknowledge the fantastic elements immediately. And in the case of Father Marin, the chief exorcist who shows up for the final act, it's like you got to introduce him in the prologue because if not, it's just going to feel like, okay, here's for the exorcism. Father Karras is the younger exorcist who's doubting his faith. Oh, here's Father Marin, like the wizard, the mage. It would be like Yoda showing up, and it's like, where have you been the whole movie? So, for him to actively join the narrative at the very end, Blatty just understood that that would just seem like a cop out and just too easy. So even though some people complain, as far as the movie goes, that opening, that 15-minute opening in Iraq is boring, it's only like a page and a half in the book. It like sets the rhythm, and then you kind of forget about it. But that despair and that dread lingers over the entire film. Um, and when you read in the book, it's so weird and cryptic. It's like it's creepy. It's because next we go into Georgetown and we're in like this domestic environment. So it's a really good way to set the tone and then our movie starts. So it's kind of like if you're doing a YouTube video right now, it would be it's popular right now. Like let's say you're doing an unboxing video or like a prank video or a video where someone gets scared. Let's say that you would start the video with the person getting scared, with the prank exploding. and you would think that's counterintuitive, like, no, no, why would I show that first? Well, your opening is so important. Those first 3 seconds of a video are so important. You show the climax first. Now we're interested in like, well, how did that happen? How did we get there? It's kind of like how people hate spoilers, but it can also be kind of exciting to be like, okay, I know what happens. Um, let's see how we got there. And this is also a good opportunity to talk about what high concept is. You hear that term in movies. High concept would be The Exorcist or something like Jaws or something like Star Wars. It's like it's all contained in the title. We know by the end of this piece of media, there is going to be an exorcism. So by setting up Father Marin and the demon Pazuzu in the beginning, the resolution is more organic and natural. It feels more authentic and real. And this is something that you're gonna have to do when you're writing without an outline. And sometimes you'll have an outline, sometimes you won't. Um, and as we mentioned, he did so much research beforehand. It's kind of like he didn't need an outline. He's basing it on a true story. So, and then he's also putting his own life into it, and just if you can get into that flow state, like, sure, you can write without knowing the end. I mean, hell, if you're writing an email to send out, you may have an idea of what your email is going to be. And some people would say, write your subject line first, because that's the most important thing. I've heard other copywriters say, don't write your subject line till the end. I think the important thing is just make sure your subject line, if you write it first, is still the right subject line by the time you've finished the end of the email. So at this stage, Blatty, he didn't have his story, right? All he knew is there would be a young girl who exemplified signs of demonic possession. The book was initially going to be a nonfiction work, but lacking the expertise and firsthand experience, he retrofitted his research into a fictional narrative. So a couple false starts. He's a real person. It didn't just flow out easily. But I keep going back to like research is just so foundational to how he was able to write this novel. And it's so good. So while attending the Jesuit-funded Georgetown University in 1950, young Bill Blatty heard a startling argument for faith. Like, this was the imprint. The priest instructing class introduced an article from the year before about a young boy who had been possessed. It was national news and authenticated by the Catholic Church. So this would have been huge. Like, until this book comes out, no one's getting possessed. Anneliese Michel, that happened in Germany like the very next year. Highly doubt she'd even read or seen the movie, but it's like just knowing that this book exists opens up your mind to the possibility of you could be possessed. So could you imagine in 1950 how somebody like William Peter Blatty must have felt hearing like, wow, this really does happen. It's not first century and Jesus is raising Lazarus from the tomb and driving demons out of, men and putting them into pigs. Like, this is 1950. This is mid 20th century, and this is going down. So he was totally moved. And, for 18 years, he's haunted by this, and he studied witchcraft, telekinesis, the history of demonic possession is documented by the church. And to accumulate research and execute his draft, Blatty was not only actively present, but he was also enthusiastic about his experiences at Georgetown University. And he used this enthusiasm to pen realistic circumstances in the novel. As writers, we won't be stirred if we're not actively seeking out and following the things that excite us. I mean, that's what attention is, right? That's why like people take Adderall and ADHD medicine to get stuff done, because the medicine makes you excited. So you're following your bliss. As artists, entrepreneurs, visionaries, we've got to be excited about what we're doing. The master, whether he be carpenter or artist, is actively present in his world. It was this active presence that allowed Blatty to effectively incorporate the Georgetown campus and landmarks into his story. Which brings us to why The Exorcist is so freaking good. It's rooted in reality. It feels real. While riding away from his family 18 hours a day, like his words, Blatty was interrupted one night at 10 the evening to learn that his mother had passed. Some of the best sections of the novel deal with Father Karras, whose guilt turns to a loss of faith when his immigrant mother dies in poverty. Clearly, the real life loss of his mother and the separation from his wife had a profound psychological effect on Blatty, and these emotions were transferred to the page. Like his mom dies, and he literally puts that into the novel. Like I don't know if he knew that was going to happen in the novel to Karras, and then it happened to Blatty. I don't know. Life is weird like that. Or like his mom dies, and he just went he just went for it. I mean, when you read this book, it's like like Diary and Frank is the only thing that really comes to mind. Just the experience of reading her diary as it was published and like reading the raw emotion of this and the urgency. I think that's why people love that character, Father Karras. Like literary dudes love Father Karras. There's just something there, man. I mean, we want stories and we want to feel things, and you definitely get that with Father Karras and The Exorcist. So imagination can be great, but you can't just depend on it. Imagination can be extremely self-indulgent and boring. So Blatty had taken nearly a year to get The Exorcist, his pet project, an apostolic work meant to illustrate God's love for his creation, from his mind to the page. And by the time he had the first draft finished, it resembled something closer to a horrific detective story. Um, it's a bit of a challenge. Blatty has stated that he started the book with no idea of how it would end. And despite this, the rough around the edges feeling helps to ground the book in reality, thus making it scarier. That's something else I would like to mention because of the individuality of all the characters and Blatty's firsthand knowledge of the location. This book does not feel like fantasy. If anything, the movie has more of that because when you're reading the book really makes you wonder until Reagan levitates during the exorcism climax. You don't know if she's possessed. You don't really know. In the movie, you can't really do that. I mean, you can assume that they're just hallucinating, but you never get that vibe. Like stuff is moving around, like she's really getting hurt and hurting people. I mean, she looks horrific. The book is different from the film in that regard. It's not it's not as fantastic. It's horrifying. The crucifix scene, like that's in the book. It's horrifying, but it's way less fantasy, way less over the top than the film. So arguably it's scary. Don't forget that Blatty had also studied exorcism for almost 2 decades, and this allowed him to write a high concept book that illustrates if demonic possession really happened, this is how it would go down. And that's like the Stephen King secret of writing good horror. If this really happened, this is how it would go down. Like that's how he wrote Salem's Lot. What would Dracula be like if it happened in Maine? This is how it would go down. So Blatty submitted his draft, thankful for the year he had to write. But he moved on, good for him. And yeah, he got really lucky, but that luck would be meaningless if he hadn't done all that research. So have it at your disposal in your mind so that you can write without having to stop to investigate and look things up. Know your characters, all right? Be present at work and in your interactions with people. Notice the quirks and annoying habits of your friends, the strange patterns of speech unique to them. Some readers complain that the characters in The Exorcist are annoying. They truly are in some respects, and this is what makes them feel so real. I mean, that's like saying, oh, the characters on The Sopranos are annoying. Get out of here. Oh, know your locations. Too often, great writers are describing two people surrounded by four walls with cliche dialogue bouncing back and forth. We get the impression the author doesn't know any more about the location than we do, and what should have been a masterful scene reads something like it was written for Alfred Hitchcock Presents. That's a really like dated line. Like, but I guess I mean I don't know. Jesus Christ. I Okay. Alfred Hitchcock presents what is that? Um okay. And then be present, be happy. Program yourself to get excited over nuances in speech and body language. Like geek out on the written word. Geek out on advertisements. I know this guy Jacob Orr, he's a copywriter, and this dude like will take pictures of good copy. Take pictures of bad copy. You know, he's in the airport, he'll take a picture of an ad. Like geek out about that stuff. Be a nerd. Keep your ear open for new details that will expand your personal philosophy. Being a writer is like creating your own religion, where you are free to mix and match elements from all over existence into your own personal world. I'm not telling you to do that with religion, because that's a little weird to me, but I know we all do that. You know, it's like, oh, I say I'm this, but I also do this. Like, hey, I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of mixing and matching, you know. But I'm not talking about with like religion. I'm saying as a writer and a creator, this is one place where you can get away with taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because yes, as I've just admitted, like we are a paradox. I am a paradox. I see myself as extremely religious, but I also got kicked out of the church I helped start for being an occultist. So clearly, what I say I am, um, other people who identify, uh, anyway, when you're an artist and creator, you can live with a little of that chaos and create out of it. Whereas at the grocery store and the church house, maybe not so much. Um, what we think of as the ultimate horror novel was really William Peter Blatty trying to prove demonic possession is real. His research not only enhanced his faith, but produced a novel that I believe will be known, but it'll be known as a theological work. And you know, people are starting to realize its impact. There was a book that came out last November called The Exorcist Effect, and it's all about how The Exorcist, but also like Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin that came out 4 years before. These books changed how people think about their faith. Like I said earlier, things that Protestants believe, like people who are staunchly anti-Catholic, they believe things about their faith that come from this book and not from the Holy Scriptures in the Bible. As I was talking about paradoxes, it's like they think the Pope is the Antichrist, but everything that they believe when it comes to like a spirit realm and the reality of demons, it comes from the Exorcist. I mean, you'll even see like evangelical Christians, not Catholics, evangelical Christians, and they're wearing like the Roman collar because it's like, yeah, my shtick is demons and casting demons out of people in my church. So I gotta wear the Roman collar because that's what media has shown us an exorciser looks like. Check out the link below. I might have a freebie down there for you. If it's not down there right now, it's coming. It's a little PDF that instills all of that good sauce I just gave you so that you can use everything I've taught you here to write your first draft of anything like William Peter Blatty.